Greenstein, Jonathan Tobin, and Mark Mellman, and with us in Washington, D.C., Shai Franklin and Matt Brodsky from the Security Studies Group. Gedi, I know you said you wanted to interject there when Owen was speaking, but you held back, so go ahead.
So I just want to say that in terms of the differences in the two approaches, there are a few issues where there is a fundamental deep difference. First is the attitude toward the constitutional institutions. Netanyahu has been attacking them systematically, the Supreme Court, the police, the media, and so on. Benny Gantz will bring a totally different approach. Second is with regard to American Jewry and world Jewry. Netanyahu has been holding a policy that was driving a growing wedge between Israel and world Jewry. Here we may see forces that will try to bring those two communities together.
You really think that that would make a difference? That Israel under Benny Gantz would be less despised around the world than Israel under Netanyahu?
I believe that a national unity government may reinstitute what was known as the Kotel Compromise, which is the compromise around the division of the Kotel, which was a huge setback to Israel-world Jewry relations. Third, I'll speak about Israel becoming a partisan issue in America. Netanyahu has seems or is understood to have taken sides in America of the Republican right wing. I believe Gantz will bring a totally different approach to Israel remaining a bipartisan issue. And last I'll say is about the Palestinian issue. I think there is a huge debate in Israel, first of all, with regard to Gaza. Netanyahu brought an approach that separated Gaza and the West Bank. I happen to agree, but many people in Israel actually disagree with him and think that the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank should be brought together. That actually tied his hands in terms of his options in Gaza. And second is the political process in the West Bank. Netanyahu allowed the expansion of settlements into the Palestinian areas. That's an area where a new government may change. And also in terms of the understanding of the prospects of the political process with the Palestinians, there too we may see a move toward an interim agreement as opposed to a permanent status agreement is with the Palestinian Authority as opposed to the PLO. I think all these elements are now could be in motion in the national unity government.
They could be in motion again as we take a live look there at the blue and white headquarters in Tel Aviv, where we're expecting Benny Gantz to take the stage. Mark Mellman, I want to bring you into this conversation. I heard you nodding when Gedi was speaking. You really think that this rise of anti-Semitism, this rise of anti-Zionism that we're seeing in the U.S. and across the world would somehow change if Prime Minister Netanyahu was not the leader of Israel?
I'm not saying it would be a total change. I'm not saying it would be a revolution. I'm not saying anti-Zionism would disappear, by no means. But there is no question that Bibi Netanyahu's relationship with the Republican Party, there's no question that his words about the Arab community, his words about the peace process have had a real and negative impact on his relationship with Democrats and the Democratic Party of the United States. That's just a fact. And a different prime minister, a different government will have a chance to repair those relations in a significant way.
I think there might be an initial move. I think many mainstream Democrats would be more comfortable with Gantz than with Netanyahu, who seems to have made Israel into a red state in the eyes of many Democrats. But I think let's not get too carried away there. The real debate within the Democratic Party, which Mark is certainly a player in, is one between mainstream Democrats who are pro-Israel and a growing anti-Zionist, very negative attitude towards Israel. That faction is not going to be any happier with a Gantz government, assuming there could be a Gantz government, or really any conceivable Israeli government, because as much as with the talk of the Trump peace plan, what Gedi said about possible movement, I think it's pretty clear that there isn't going to be any movement. Abbas isn't going to sign any agreement with anybody. And I think the anti-Zionists will remain just as tough. And very soon we'll have a reason to be disappointed in any idea that a Gantz government, assuming that one could happen, would get any closer to what they want.
In the meantime, we do have a Trump administration, and there very well could be a Trump administration after the 2020 elections. In the scenario that somehow Benny Gantz does become the Prime Minister of Israel, how does that impact the situation? Because Benny Gantz, for example, has said that he does not support an Israel-U.S. defense pact. Not that there is one, but there's talk of one being discussed. Benny Gantz has come out against that. We know that President Trump is a strong supporter of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Do you anticipate any kind of change in the dynamics between the U.S. under President Trump and Israel under Prime Minister Gantz?
There's no question that Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid can get along very well with the Trump administration. They could also get along very well with the Democratic administration. The difference is that Bibi Netanyahu can only get along well with the Trump administration. That's the real difference. And yes, are there some hardcore anti-Zionist forces in the Democratic Party? There are, but you're talking about 5, 6, 7 people. They are a tiny, tiny minority. The question
in the House caucus, yes, but not in the Democratic
in the Democratic among Democratic elected officials, they are a tiny, tiny segment. The question is that segment going to grow or going to shrink? And a Netanyahu government makes it very likely that that group grows. A different kind of government, a Gantz government, makes it more likely that that group shrinks.
All right. I do want to recap very quickly the Channel 13 poll that has been updated before I bring in our guests from Washington, D.C. Again, these are the exit poll results. And Channel 13 has been more accurate than others when it comes to getting this right. It's projecting that Likud has 30 seats. Blue and White has 32 seats. The Joint Arab List, the third biggest party with 15 Knesset seats, followed by Israel Beitenu with 8 seats, Yamina with 6 seats, United Torah Judaism, that's the ultra-Orthodox religious party, with 8 seats, Shas, the Sephardic religious party, with 9 seats, Labour Gesher with 6 seats. A really disappointing drop, although to be expected, but keeping in mind that Labour was once the predominant party in Israeli politics, coming in with 6 seats according to this poll. Democratic Union with 6 seats, and Jewish Power, Otzma Yehudit, according to this poll, failing to make that 3.25% electoral threshold, failing to get even one Knesset seat. All right, let's bring in Matt Brodsky from the Security Studies Group, joining us from our studios in Washington, D.C. And Matt, again, initial results, they have been wrong in the past, but if we're looking at them, they do seem to point to a national unity government. What's your read?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And again, with all the caveats that have been made correctly, there's far too many variables at this point. We first need the actual math from tomorrow to tell us what these seats are. Then, of course, it's up to President Rivlin to figure out who's going to go first. A national unity government seems to be exactly what the parties are basically looking at. Reading what Lieberman is saying also points in that direction. And frankly, a lot of the national security issues that are on the table are really what is going to be, I think, guiding a lot of these decisions. There's a lot on the table regarding Iran right now, which I think takes precedence even over the peace plan. And that points to having a unified
Matt, is that surprising?
Israeli political.
Is that surprising, considering that Israel is in a very tough security situation, so much so that Avigdor Lieberman referenced it as potentially a reason why he would not be part of any government, because he realizes the dire security situation that Israel is in. Is it surprising that Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is known as Mr. Security, may, according to these exit polls, not have retained his title and not have made that record 5th term as prime minister, given all the threats on several fronts: Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Lebanon, and of course those ongoing attacks with rockets bombarding Israel south coming out of Gaza and Hamas? Is it surprising that Netanyahu wasn't able to channel the Mr. Security title?
I don't know if it's surprising because, you know, at a certain point, once he's outlasted any other prime minister as a serving prime minister in Israel, at some point this day would come. But again, he's a phoenix who tends to rise from the ashes too, and there may still be another rabbit he could pull out of his hat. We still don't know. But on security issues, the fact is, you still are to have a very security conscious, security driven unity government. Even if it's not a unity government, if it's blue and white, you still have the generals. It's not suddenly a kumbaya leftist type of polity that's going to be in charge now. So the day was preordained. It was going to happen at some point, but we'll see if it in fact does. There's many cards, I think, that are still left to be played in the weeks ahead.
All right. Jonathan Tobin, again, I want to bring you into this conversation and ask you, how different would it be security-wise under Benny Gantz?
I think in some ways, the answer to that question reflects a failure of Netanyahu's last two campaigns. He has consistently tried to brand the Blue and White as a leftist party, a party as if Blue and White was Meretz, which went into coalition with Ehud Barak. That didn't work. Nobody really believes that a party led by, with a chorus line of generals, including Moshe Ya'alon, who is arguably to the right of Netanyahu, is a leftist party. It seems to be Blue and White, if it succeeds and gets more mandates for the Knesset, it's because it was able to present itself as a centrist party and reflecting a real consensus within the Israeli public about the peace process and about security issues. And that's why Netanyahu's Mr. Security routine may not have done the trick for him this time.
I actually think that in this case, Netanyahu's problem was his success. Because the campaign that he presided over against Iran in Syria is almost unanimously supported across the political spectrum in Israel, so much so that the public doesn't really see a difference whether Netanyahu leads the campaign against Iran or others. People agree with the way this campaign has been managed. I believe it's a brilliant campaign.
By the way, Gidi, just to interrupt you there, what we're listening to is music coming from the Blue and White headquarters in Tel Aviv. We understand that Benny Gantz has arrived in the building. He's expected to take the stage at any moment now. Seems like a very jubilant crowd. They are now celebrating those exit poll results. If we're judging by those supporters who are jumping up and down, they seem to be in a very celebratory mood, and they're cheering him on. Benny, he's expected to take the stage at any minute. Benny Gantz, keeping in mind, he does have a rotation agreement with Yair Lapid. So any national unity government, it could get a little complicated in terms of how we rotate things. Let's check in with Mike Wagenheim on what that could possibly mean as we await Benny Gantz to take the stage. So Mike, what could that even look like when we have all of these rotation agreements?
There had long been speculation that Gantz was going to force Lapid to dump that rotation agreement. Poll after poll had showed that Blue and White was losing some support with that rotation agreement, but Gantz and Lapid stuck with it. It seemed to have worked to their advantage. So now, after all of that, can Lapid wind up taking a back seat again? The Blue and White Party is a very eclectic party, we'll leave it that way, made up of these IDF generals and Yair Lapid, who was a former finance minister but really had very little military experience. He was a journalist, sort of this hodgepodge that was put together at the very last moment before the April elections. There had been internal dissension all throughout the summer, leaks and bad-mouthing about this candidate and that candidate coming from within the party, friendly fire, so to speak, and it was a question mark as to whether Blue and White could even survive as an entity leading up to the September elections, and furthermore, whether it could survive after the elections and hold together. This now is going to be the big question going forward. Can Blue and White hold together, hold these divergent opinions and policy platforms together? You have Avi Nissenkorn, who was the former head of the big union in Israel, the Histadrut, far to the left. You have Moshe Ya'alon, who our guest mentioned before, far to the right, definitely to the right, I would think, of Benjamin Netanyahu. Divergent opinions, divergent policy platforms.
Absolutely. And Mike, that was a point that Netanyahu was trying to push hard during his campaign. He was stressing that Blue and White, and would often say Yair Lapid ahead of Benny Gantz. He'd say, you're voting for Blue and White, Yair Lapid, and then Benny Gantz, sort of channeling on the sentiment from the Israeli voters that were less pro-Yair Lapid and more pro-Benny Gantz. But if these exit polls are correct, it doesn't seem as though that message has resonated. But there could be a serious problem of disunity amongst Kachol Lavan. Mark, do you anticipate that being an issue? If there is a national unity government, you've essentially got, let's put it out there, three big egos at Blue and White. Throw in Netanyahu, and you've got four big egos. How do you get a rotating prime ministership in that kind of dynamic?
I think you're underestimating the number of big egos involved. But the reality is that they're going to have
the four biggest.
They're going to have to come to some agreement to make this work, and people are going to have to decide whether how they perceive the national interest compares to their own personal interest.
Right.
But just go back to the security issues for 1 second, because I think it is important. The reality is a lot of Israelis felt that it was not just a matter of military security, that Bibi Netanyahu had Putin in one pocket and Trump in the other, and that was unique to him. Before the last election, that really showed. Zachary Baumel's remains returning, big ceremony in the Kremlin, Trump giving all kinds of positive reinforcement to Israel with the Golan, so on. This time, there wasn't anything more to give. There was no more Zachary Baumel to bring back. There was no more Kremlin's ceremony. There was nothing for the United States to do either. So that tactic on Bibi's part just didn't work as well this time because there wasn't as much to it.
Again, we will see. I cannot stress this enough. These are only the exit poll results so far, so we may be biting our tongues, backpedaling on our words as those actual results do come in. Now, we're waiting Benny Gantz to take the stage at the Blue and White headquarters in Tel Aviv. As we do so, let's check in with Jeremy Sultan. He's joining us in our Tel Aviv studios. He is a Yamina party candidate. Jeremy, good to have you with us, and I'll apologize in advance if I have to interrupt you when Benny Gantz takes the stage. But look, either way you look at it, Yamina coming in, according to these exit polls, with an average of 7 Knesset seats. Not bad when you look at the fact that Ayelet Shaked, she didn't even make the threshold last time. So what's your read?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're going to compare it to the April election, this is obviously a gain. Really, if we look at the exit polls, and as you said, we should wait for the actual results before we start playing all this coalition math. I know it's very easy for us to jump into all this speculation. But again, if we are looking at the exit polls, and that's what you do at this point in the timeline until we do get these results, it's Yisrael Beitenu and Yamina who are the only two parties that have really gained out of this election, and we've gained significantly. So obviously to go from 0 to 7 is a very, very nice jump for us, and it's going to be very interesting to see exactly what happens in terms of the blocks and how all this shakes out. But as you said, yes, this is a very good result for us.
Stand with the tension between Ayelet Shaked and Prime Minister Netanyahu, because although they're both on the right, Ayelet Shaked is arguably further to the right than Prime Minister Netanyahu, and she had taken issues with some of his policies. So it's unlikely that there would be a coalition with them, considering the math that we have at the moment. But how would that tension play out between Yamina and Likud?
Well, I think it's important to mention that Ayelet Shaked, was a minister in the previous government. Yes, she was the justice minister in the Netanyahu government from 2015 to 2019 up until the April election. So, it wouldn't be new for them to sit together around the cabinet table. Of course, she was also a member of the security cabinet. So I don't necessarily think that would be an issue if we do somehow see a situation which again could still possibly happen if we see one of the parties of either the Democratic Union or Labor somehow, instead of getting 5, which they got in the exit polls, if they somehow lose a seat and change, they fall under the electoral threshold. That really just changes the whole map. So in a situation like that, obviously you could still have a situation of a right government, but that's not what the exit polls are showing, and that's why we're not talking about that particular issue at this point. However, I do think that despite whatever tensions, and there were tensions, this is a election campaign. In an election campaign, you're going to have people say things and do things that the other one is not going to necessarily take as, something that is just an easy breeze. So, yeah, look, that's election campaign. You finish the election campaign, and then you have to start forming a government and governing. We've just had, our second election this year. It's time for us to go ahead and form a government. And despite the fact that I do hear a lot of people are saying maybe we'll have some sort of third election, I'm quite certain we will not have one. We'll come up with some sort of solution. Of course, right now the coalition math looks very interesting. But like I said, I think we should wait till the final results are in. It might be a bit more clear in the morning tomorrow.
As far as those final results go, Jeremy Sultan, according to the Central Election Commission, only 0.07% of the votes have been tallied, less than 1%. I do want to stress that, a very low number indeed. But according to those, Likud leads with 32% of the votes counted, which is less than 1% at this point. So in terms of the official results, anything can happen. And in terms of the exit polls, we must keep in mind that they have a history of being notoriously incorrect. I want to introduce two analysts on the set. Joining me now is Thane Rosenbaum, a distinguished university professor at Touro College and a Middle East analyst. Shachar Razani is a former spokesperson for the Israeli consulate. Still with us, Mark Melman, Shai Franklin, and Matt Brodsky. Thane, we were projecting things and we were projecting various scenarios, including a national unity government. Is that where Israel is headed?
Well, what you said before is still correct, Michelle. The numbers are not there. I mean, most of the votes have been not counted, and so we don't really know what the outcome will be. And there's still votes from Israeli diplomats and soldiers and hospital workers and patients that haven't been tallied either. Also remember, in April, people thought the new right would have more power, and they didn't get 3.25. Moshe Feiglin's party, the Zehut party, didn't.
Which now merged with Likud.
Which now merged with the Likud. So, and Lieberman, they weren't sure where he was going to be, and he turned out to. So it's just showing the polling as well as exit polling has been incredibly unreliable, and it's too soon to tell. Having said that, if the exit polls are reliable, what is disappointing is Yamina, if this is what it turns out. I just thought that this woman, Ayelet Shaked's party, everyone predicted, I think, on some level, would do much better than she's done. And I think that it would, in fact, by not, and the Zehut party, the Moshe Feiglin party, they got folded within Likud.
Right.
There were people who thought, well, the polls are not really accurately reflecting that movement of the Zehut party into Likud. If these numbers are holding up, that just means that Yamina and Zehut never had the kind of electoral support that we had hoped.
And of course, one of the big drawing points of Moshe Feiglin's Zehut party was his pledge to legalize marijuana, to expand on that, to allow for marijuana to be exported. That seemed to resonate with a lot of the voters. Shachar Razani, I want to bring you in and get your read on where things stand. What are the scenarios that you envision, given where we are right now?
Well, first of all, Israeli politics provides once more for an unbelievable stage. From the opportunity, which is maybe a true great news for Israel, for a liberal, secular, national unity government, which will hold the majority of over 70 members of Knesset, which will require compromises, both from the blue and white and Likud. But imagine a scenario in which the ultra-Orthodox no longer have a stranglehold over the government that truly provides for a unique opportunity that hasn't been seen for a couple of decades in Israel.
And that was exactly what Israel Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman's party, seems to have centered on, if these exit polls are correct, because he really pitted this election as the secular Israelis versus the ultra-Orthodox Israelis, keeping in mind that he pulled out of the coalition, potential coalition with Netanyahu, over his stance that he wanted to make sure that the ultra-Orthodox are no longer exempt from military service. He was not giving up on that. He wanted them to also be part of the conscription like the rest of the Israelis are. So he really did channel in on that discord between the secular Jews and the ultra-Orthodox Jews. That seems to have paid off for him if these results are correct. Shachar, another thing that Avigdor Lieberman, the reason we had the April elections was because of the security position. He felt frustrated that Prime Minister Netanyahu was not handling the rocket attacks, the arson balloons coming out from Hamas, coming from Gaza successfully. He felt that there needed to be a tougher stance when it comes to handling Gaza and terrorism. Do you expect anything different on that front under a Benny Gantz prime minister?
Well, I have to say that when you think about Lieberman, he was Minister of Defense under the Netanyahu government. So I'm not sure I would focus on the complaints vis-a-vis Gaza. I would rather focus about a party with 5 seats. And had he joined the Netanyahu coalition in April, he would have seen the diminishing of his party and running into the sunset. And instead, he chose to focus on the ultra-Orthodox scene. When you come to think about Lieberman's history, he has been seen wearing a kippah. He has been seen roaming the courts of the Hasidic rabbis. So he's no stranger to those courts. However, he was able to re-emerge as a relevant, viable party, and it's absolutely clear that listening to him tonight was a great showing of how revenge is best served cold.
But I think it has to be said that the issue of secular religious relationships in Israel, the fact that there is a draft bill on the table, is owed to Yair Lapid. He put this issue on the table 7 years ago. He kept it going in the government he was part of. He kept it going in the Supreme Court. This issue is on the agenda in Israel because of Yair Lapid. And you'll notice that Yair Lapid was able to move blue and white to that message as well at the end of the campaign. And that was critical for them, critical for blue and white, to be talking about a secular unity government. And that helped them keep some of the seats that they would.
All right, we understand that Benny Gantz is expected to take the stage. We're awaiting a speech from him at the blue and white headquarters in Tel Aviv. We understand that Moshe Ya'alon is currently speaking on that stage, perhaps setting the scene for Benny Gantz to come and take the stage. In the meantime, let's check in with our Mike Wagenheim, who has an update. Mike.
I wanted to build on something that Thane said about Benjamin Netanyahu trying to draw these other parties, merge with these other parties, and get their support. He mentioned Zehut. Doesn't look like those votes really translated to Likud. Something even bigger, though. Likud and the center-right Kulanu party merged for this particular election. Now, Kulanu had been to the left of Netanyahu, but within his coalition, they were worth 4 seats. In the last, actually 5 seats in the last Knesset. They were expected to be worth about 4 seats in the upcoming one. Those votes didn't come to Likud. If you think about it, Likud had 35 seats in the last parliament. If you added in 4 or 5 seats from Kulanu, maybe a seat or 2 worth of votes from Zehut, Likud would be projected around, what, 40, 41 seats maybe? The exit polls showing much, much lower totals than that. So those parties, even though they merged and even though their leaders pledged support to Netanyahu and those leaders said that their supporters should vote for Likud, those votes simply have not translated. There's a reason that Kulanu supporters didn't vote for Likud to begin with. There's a reason Zehut supporters didn't vote for Likud to begin with. So it was a strategy for Netanyahu to try to open up the tent a little bit. But those votes just haven't come his way, at least according to these exit polls.
At least according to the exit polls, and I have to make that point over and over again.
Let's keep making it.
Let's keep making that point because these are not the official results yet. So too early for celebrations on any front. What we can celebrate, though, as a number of people are doing, is Israel's democracy, keeping in mind Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. And in celebration of that, there have been a number of election watch parties being hosted across the United States tonight, including one by the American Zionist Movement, where we join our correspondent Michelle Devon at the party in New York City. Michelle, what's the mood there like?
Good evening, Michelle. As you said, a celebration of democracy, and that's exactly what was here in New York at this bar. We had about 100 supporters of Israel come to watch the election. Most of them have actually left frustrated because they thought that by now they would have a clearer picture of what is going on, and a lot feel like kind of a deja vu feeling that they're not sure where the scale will be tipped. And as you said, it's important to note these are the exit polls. These are not the official polls by any means. And I'm joined here by Ari Ackerman, a big supporter of Israel. Ari, what do you think is going to happen, and what would you expect as the best case scenario at this point?
Well, best case scenario for us is that something gets decided tonight, right? For us, I mean Israel. It's been going on a long time, and I'm sure the Israelis are frustrated. American Jews who support Israel just want this resolved so we can move on with the Israeli government.
Absolutely. And what do you think the U.S. government and Trump would like to see happening in these elections?
Well, I mean, very clearly, Trump is Bibi's guy. As far as myself and I think other Americans, we want whatever the Israelis want. This is the only democratic state in the Middle East. They have free elections, and they get to choose their government. And many Zionists in the United States are just happy to support who the Israelis want in their government.
So it's a celebration of democracy, as we're saying.
It's a beautiful celebration of democracy. All the Americans here are here to support the Israelis. We want you to know we're behind you. And whatever you decide, we'll continue to support you.
And if you can make a guess, what do you think is going to happen in the next few hours?
I mean, hopefully it gets resolved. That's my guess, that somebody is the next prime minister of Israel.
All right, Ari Ackerman, thank you so much. So not giving away what he thinks, but hoping it gets resolved, which I'm sure everyone can agree with. Everyone is hoping hoping this gets resolved. No one wants to see a third round of elections. We're here from New York City's AZM viewing party, and we'll send it back to you, Michelle.
All right, Michelle Devon, thank you so much at the viewing party in New York City. And from one party to another, let's check in with the blue and white headquarters. There we have Yair Lapid taking the stage.
You listen
Let's
to
listen in.
Gabi and Bogi. I'm the politician that's the least hoarse here.
אזרחי ישראל הוכיחו היום שהם יותר טובים מהפוליטיקאים שלהם ויותר
Today, the
טובים
citizens
מהפוליטיקה
of
שלהם.
Israel proved that they are better than their politicians.
הקיצוניים נשארו מחוץ לכנסת.
The extremists stayed out of the Knesset.
הפוליטיקה של השנאה והפחד
Politics of hatred and fear.
האנשים שניסו להפחיד אותנו
People who tried to scare us.
הרחיקו אותם מהקלפיות.
They tried to scare us from voting, and they brought us to the polls instead.
הערכים הישראלים חזרו להיות במרכז הבמה של
Israeli values came back to the center.
אני רוצה להגיד לכם משהו, ואני רוצה להגיד משהו גם לתקשורת שנמצאת
I want to tell you something, and I want to tell the media something.
בימים הקרובים כולנו נזדקק בעיקר לסבלנות.
In the coming days, we will need patience.
ארוך, עדין, מורכב.
It's a long, delicate, complex process,
מאחורי דלתיים סגורות, וכך צריך, ובסוף
and it will happen behind closed doors as it should be.
גם מחברינו בתקשורת, גם מהחברים
We want to ask our friends in the media
כאן, להיות סבלניים,
be patient,
לתהליך הזה את הזמן שלו, כי הוא צריך את הזמן
give the
שלו.
process its time because it needs
שאני
time.
רוצה להגיד, זה שאני נורא אוהב אתכם.
What I really want to say is that I really love you.
וכעת, גבירותיי ורבותיי, אני מתכבד להזמין לבימה.
All right, we heard from Yair Lapid, and now it looks like we're about to hear from the leader of Blue and White, Kahol Lavan, Benny Gantz, taking the stage.
שלום לכם, חברים, חברות,
Greetings, friends.
פעילות ופעילים יקרים.
Dear activists,
אני שמח
I'm happy,
ונרגש מאוד להיות כאן הערב.
very excited to be here tonight.
כמובן שנמתין לתוצאות האמת.
Of course, we will wait for the
אבל
official
כמו שזה
results.
נראה, עמדנו במשימה, ולא פחות חשוב,
we
עמדנו
did what we came to do.
בדרך שלנו.
And most importantly, we did it in our way.
חברים, כחול לבן
My friends,
הייתה
Blue and White
ונשארה כוח גדול ומרכזי במרחב הפוליטי הישראלי, וזה בזכותכם.
was and remains a central force on the political scene in Israel, and that's thanks to you.
לכן אני מבקש קודם כל להודות לכם.
I therefore want to thank you.
על עוד דבר,
You're welcome.
עברנו יחד 3 חודשים אינטנסיביים.
We had 3 intense months together.
באו אחרי חודשים אינטנסיביים.
After many more intense months,
נראה לי ההיריון הזה של איזה 9 חודשים מטורפים.
I think this pregnancy of 9 months,
ואף אחד מאיתנו עם הרבה מאוד רגעים של כיף ועם פה ושם רגעים של
there
כיף.
was a lot of fun in it, but there were also a lot of difficult times.
לכל אחת ואחד מכם.
Each and every one of you,
אתם עבדתם בלי הפסקה.
you worked
נתתם את
endlessly.
הלב ואת הנשמה.
You gave your heart and your soul,
גבול להערכה שלי כלפיכם.
and I have a lot of respect for you.
ברשותכם, ברשותכם, ומאהבה גדולה, אני מבקש לומר תודה לרויטל
I want to thank
ולילדים
Revital,
המדהימים שלי,
my amazing children
שתמכו,
who supported,
ליוו, וראו אותי מעט מאוד בבית,
saw me very little at home,
בפעילויות השטח שפה ושם הם התלוו אליי,
sometimes joined me in the field.
שלטו בי מרחוק. אתם הדבר היקר לי מכל דבר אחר.
You are
תודה
more
לכם.
dear to me than anything else. Thank you so much.
אני מבקש גם להודות לשותפיי,
I also want to
להנהגת
thank my
כחול לבן.
partners to the leadership.
ליאיר,
Yair,
שאני גאה לקרוא לו חברי,
who I am proud that he's my friend.
שאני גאה לקרוא לו חברי מפני שהוא לא רק שותף פוליטי, אלא גם חבר.
He's not just a political partner, he's also a
Boogie.
friend.
מפקדי
My
והאיש
commander,
הישר והממלכתי ביותר בפוליטיקה
who
הישראלית.
has the most
אני גאה
integrity
שאתה שותף שלי.
on the political scene in Israel.
ולגבי,
And Gabi,
לגבי, מנהיג,
a leader,
אדם, חבר ושותף, מי ששרף
friend and
את
a partner,
השטח יחד איתכם, צפון, דרום, מזרח, מערב.
who went with me all over the country, north and south, east and west.
גבי, מבקש להזכיר לך, אם אתה לא יודע, אנחנו בתל אביב, לא בטוח שאתה יודע איפה אתה
I
עכשיו.
want to remind you, Gabi, that we're in Tel Aviv. You might not realize where you are right now.
מבקש להודות גם לחברי הכנסת, תרימו שנייה את היד שלכם.
I also want to thank all the Knesset members. Please raise your hand.
כולכם פעלתם באזורים ובקהילות בכל רחבי
You
הארץ,
worked in
ועשיתם
communities and
עבודה
areas all over the
נהדרת. אני
country.
רוצה גם להודות לצוות הקמפיין.
I also want to
והכי
thank the
חשוב,
campaign staff.
הכי חשוב, תודה גדולה לפעילות ולפעילים.
And most
שלנו
importantly,
ולכל
thank
מי
you to
שהצביע
all the
כחול לבן.
activists.
אתם חברים שלי,
You, my friends,
חלק משמעותי בשינוי המסתמן.
are an integral
אתם
part
השינוי.
of the change that we are going to do here.
נקיים מפגש לסיכום ומפגש לתודה, וכמו שיאיר אמר, סבר בערבית, סבלנות, צריך להמתין לדברים.
As Yair said, we need
עברנו
patience.
ביחד דרך ארוכה.
We have a long way to go.
דרך ארוכה וקשה.
Difficult path.
לקחנו על עצמנו משימה לא פשוטה.
We took upon
וכאמור,
ourselves
נמתין
a
כעת
difficult
בסבלנות
task.
לתוצאות האמת.
We have to wait for the final
גם
results.
שכך אפשר לומר שלפי התוצאות המסתמנות נתניהו לא הצליח
But
במשימתו.
based on the results that we have at the moment, Netanyahu is not able to form a government.
אנחנו לעומתו הוכחנו
We, on the other hand, proved
שהרעיון שנקרא כחול לבן,
that the idea called blue and white
שהקמנו אותו לפני קצת יותר מחצי שנה,
that we established just 6 months ago
בגדול, והוא כאן כדי להישאר.
succeeded greatly, and we are here to stay.
תודה.
Thank you.
לפי התוצאות, חברים, לפי התוצאות
According to the
שבידינו
results, my
כרגע,
friends,
נראה שבפעם השנייה
appears
אזרחי ישראל נתנו בנו אמון. למעלה ממיליון אזרחים
over a million
החליטו לומר
citizens
לא להסתה ולפילוג, כן
said
לאחדות.
no to incitement and division. They said yes to unity,
לא לשחיתות וכן לניקיון כפיים.
no to corruption, yes
לא
to clean
לניסיונות
government,
לרסק את הדמוקרטיה הישראלית וכן לשמירה על ממלכתיות.
no to
ושמירה על
destroying
מדינת
the Israeli
ישראל
democracy,
כמדינה יהודית ודמוקרטית.
yes to maintaining a Jewish democratic state.
הבטחתי והבטחנו לאורך כל הקמפיין, ואני
We promised throughout the
ביתר
campaign.
שאת שמבחינתי הערב, ולא משנה איך הוא ימשיך,
And regardless of what
מתחיל
happens
המסע
tonight,
לתיקון החברה הישראלית.
we are here to repair Israeli society.
תודה חברים.
Thank you, my
תודה.
friends.
לישראל חברים, יש אתגרים ביטחוניים אדירים, ומי כמונו יודע
Israel has immense security challenges, and we are all aware of it.
איך להתמודד איתם.
And we all know how to deal with
אבל
it.
לא פחות מהביטחון. מדאיג אותי
But what worries me more about than security
הסדקים הפנימיים בינינו. הפכו
are the
במערכת
divisions
הבחירות
between
ראשי
us.
לקרעים המאיימים לפרק אותנו.
There are tears in our society that threaten to tear us apart.
כדי לאחות אותם. החברה הישראלית חזקה, חיונית ובוטחת
Israeli society
בעצמה.
is strong,
יחד עם זאת, היא פצועה והגיעה
but it is also
השעה
wounded,
לרפא אותה.
and we must heal it.
נחפש ונמצא מרחבי הסכמה של אזרחי ישראל.
We will find areas of agreement within Israel
לשלומה של המדינה ושלומם של כל אזרחיה.
for the sake of the state and for the sake of its citizens.
התחילו הלילה, אני כבר שוחחתי עם עמיתיי אמיר פרץ וניצן הורוביץ.
I already spoke with my colleagues Amir Peretz and Nitzan Horowitz,
לשוחח בימים הקרובים גם עם אביגדור ליברמן.
and I will also speak with Avigdor Lieberman.
אני מתכוון לדבר עם כולם.
I plan on speaking with everybody.
החל מהלילה נפעל להקמתה של ממשלת אחדות רחבה שתבטא את רצון העם.
From tonight, we will start building a broad national unity government that will represent the people.
רצון להחזיר את החברה הישראלית למסלול ולעקוב אחרי רצון העם.
Put Israeli society back on track.
מעליה אנחנו עם אחד.
We are one nation.
הכיתוב והשיסוי מאחורינו.
All the division must be put behind us.
לפנינו. אני קורא מכאן גם ליריביי הפוליטיים מכל המחנות.
I'm also calling my political rivals from all camps.
נפעל ביחד.
Let's work together.
ישראלית טובה, צודקת
We
ושוויונית
need
לכל
a
אזרחיה.
just Israeli society that serves all of its citizens.
כפי שאמרנו כמה וכמה פעמים,
As we said many
אני
times,
חוזר על הדברים. אנחנו נמתין לתוצאות האמת.
we will wait for the final results,
נראה באמת מה אמר הבוחר ונלך לאורו.
and we will listen to what the voters had to say.
שאתמול בלילה הייתי בכותל.
Last night, I was at the Western Wall,
ביקשתי שוב, הבא שלום עלינו ועשה שלום בתוכנו.
and I prayed for peace
כוחי
upon us
לממש
and
את
amongst
השליחות
us.
הזו. תודה רבה לכם.
Thank you very much.
Benny Gantz, leader of the Blue and White Party, taking the stage there at the Kahol Lavan Blue and White headquarters. There he is shaking hands with his partners, Yair Lapid and Moshe Yaalon. The crowd very happy, and Gabi Ashkenazi there as well. The crowd in a celebratory mood, although Benny Gantz made it clear several times during the speech that we need to wait for the official results. He did hedge everything with that these are still the preliminary or exit poll results. So he was very careful not to make the same mistake as he did in the April elections, where he declared victory a little too early. He thanked his wife and children. He thanked his supporters. He thanked the staff. He thanked the activists. Of course, thanked Yair Lapid and Moshe Yaalon. And he did stress that there's still a very long way to go. There's a difficult path ahead, a difficult task ahead. But he said that according to these results, Netanyahu has failed to form a governing coalition government. And he said that the results indicate that the small party, Blue and White, that was formed just 6 months ago, has succeeded. It is a political novice, but that they are here to stay. And he stressed the point that although there are great security challenges, he said that he is more concerned about the internal divisions within Israel. To that point, he stressed that he wants a broad national unity government. He said he's already started to speak to Amir Peretz from the Labour Gesher party, that he wants to talk to Lieberman. He made it very clear that he wants to talk to everyone, political rivals, political allies. He said he's calling all the people to come together for talks to put together a government that he says will heal a divisive Israel. That's his position, Benny Gantz, leader of the Blue and White Party, but again, making it very clear, hedging his bets and stressing several times that they are waiting for the final results and they don't want to be too presumptuous. But certainly, as we can see, they're hugging, cheering, patting each other on the back, a real sense of celebration coming out of the Kahol Lavan headquarters. And you can't take away the fact that this is a success, considering this is a political novice to the Israeli landscape. Party that was formed just 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago, with a couple of odd political bedfellows, but if these exit polls are correct, they may have succeeded in their mission. As for the real results, we are finally getting some actual vote results from the Central Israeli Election Commission, so let's take a look at those. 5.25% of the vote counted. Let's stress that, just 5.25% of the vote counted. But Likud has 31.1% of the vote. Blue and White has 24.6% of the vote. Israel Beitenu has 9.7% of the vote. Shas has 9.2% of the vote. United Torah Judaism, 6.2% of the vote counted so far. Yamina has 5.7%. Labor Gesher with 5%. And the Democratic Union is at 3.5%. The other parties, including the Joint Arab List and Otzma Jewish Power, do not have enough votes as of now to cross the election threshold. But again, we have to stress that these are just about 5.26% of the votes counted right now, just above 336,000 total, and there are more than 6 million more votes to count. So again, the actual results trickling in, but such a small percentage that it's not really giving us an accurate count. All right, let's now check in with Owen Altman at our election desk at our Tel Aviv News headquarters. So, Owen, we heard from Benny Gantz, and it's important to note that he did stress that these results are preliminary, very careful not to be too self-congratulatory. But, Owen, it is a remarkable feat that you do have this party, Blue and White, that is really a newcomer to the political landscape and has made a serious dent. Any way you look at it, any way the numbers shake out, they've certainly made a serious impact. It's very remarkable considering that this is such a fresh party, isn't it?
Absolutely, Michelle, and it's not just a one-hit wonder. It did it in April when it was the new thing on the block, and now it's done it again in September, maybe more meaningfully, because, of course, of the context that Benjamin Netanyahu, as Benny Gantz said, it looks like he will not have the 61 seats that he would need to form a right-wing government, although, of course, as we all keep stressing, the final results are still coming in. You know, a couple things that really stood out from that Benny Gantz speech. First of all, really reaching out to Yair Lapid. Michelle, as you mentioned, this is a group of strange political bedfellows, and Yair Lapid's place in that quartet, the other three of which are former chiefs of staff of the Israel Defense Forces, he was often the odd man out and often at odds with the other three. But Benny Gantz being very careful to stress that Yair Lapid was my friend and not just my political partner. And there's a practical reason for that, Michelle. Yair Lapid has a real role to play here. Benny Gantz will need him by his side, making decisions with him and going into a government with him, and not, from Benny Gantz's perspective, God forbid, breaking up Blue and White in some way. That's number one. Number two, the key takeaway phrase, broad national unity government. Michelle, what's missing there? The word secular that we kept hearing from Benny Gantz. Would he maybe reach out to the ultra-Orthodox parties? He mentioned he's talking to everybody. That would break a promise, but open up new opportunities for making a government. And also, I don't believe that we heard, again, Benny Gantz repeating the pledge not to sit with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That may well still be his position, but I don't believe that we heard it tonight. Instead, again, he stressed the need to unify different parts of Israeli society. Could there be a hint there at steps that might be to come, and Benny Gantz opening up new options for forming that national unity government he talked about? Maybe he dropped some hints for us tonight.
Maybe he did. That's excellent analysis and excellent points that you picked up on. Owen Altman live in our Tel Aviv studios. Let's go back to our panel. Thane Rosenbaum, Mark Melman, Shachar Azani, and joining us from Washington, D.C., Matt Brodsky and Shai Franklin. Matt, I'd like to go to you in D.C. As you heard, Benny Gantz making it very clear that he wants a broad coalition government. Some excellent analysis by our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Owen Altman, pointing out that he hasn't ruled out anyone in this broad alliance. He did say he's already spoken to Amir Peretz of the Labour Party. He did say that he's willing to speak to everyone. So what is your read based on what we just heard from the leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz?
My readers, welcome to Israeli politics. To those who are not initiated to it, what is said before elections often doesn't make a difference on post-election night. Now, part of this, of course, could be that he is, of course, hedging his bets, not wanting to make the previous mistake he made in April by trying to claim too much of a mandate before there's actually any mandate given. But really, he could just be leaving open all of his options on the table. And again, why wouldn't you, if you're him, if he is allowed to go forward and have a first crack at putting together a coalition, he will want to be able to do so and create the widest coalition probably possible. So most interesting that he did not, with what he said about the secular parties basically and Orthodox parties not wanting to necessarily rule either side out right now. We'll see what happens.
We'll see indeed what happens, but we have to give credit where credit is due, and that is the success of the Blue and White Party, that they certainly have succeeded in making a mark on the Israeli political landscape. Let's check in now with Mike Wagenheim. He does have some more specific results from the actual totals. About 5.3% of the total vote results are in. Let's go to Mike Wagenheim.
These are very preliminary results, but the first hard numbers that we can really report to you tonight, about 5.25% of the vote is in the ruling Likud party with 31% of the vote right now. Meanwhile, Kahol Levan, the Blue and White Party, led by Benny Gantz, who you just saw on your screen a few moments ago, with about a quarter of the vote, just under 25%. Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu Party at just under 10% right now. Meanwhile, the Shas Party polling, not polling at this point, but the hard numbers showing them right around 9% of the vote. Nobody else has more than 7% of the vote at this current time. Again, this is only about 5.25% of the vote that has been tallied. We have a long ways to go ahead of us, but those are the initial numbers that are coming in from polling stations around the country.
So, Mike, sticking with you, what could this mean for potential coalitions based on what we heard from Benny Gantz, that he's open to all possibilities? What are some of the scenarios, or the most likely scenario that you see it, based on the hints that he's dropped, that he's really open to anything and anyone at this point?
You know, the most likely scenario is still a unity government, something I've been saying for a few months now. It is the most likely. You know, there are all sorts of conspiracy theories out there and all sorts of claims that this one is lying and that one is lying, and they probably are based on past experience. But just looking at the hard numbers themselves, it's all about arithmetic. How do you get to 61 and really beyond that? Because I think the Israeli public is tired of fragile governments that keep falling before their mandates are up. How do you get to a broader government? Well, you take the two biggest parties, Kahol Levan, Blue and White, and Likud. The question then becomes, well, how do you get Likud into the fold and keep your promise if you're Benny Gantz? Keep your promise not to sit with Benjamin Netanyahu, which Owen's right, he did not repeat that tonight. That is now the next step. And we keep hearing, as the minutes roll along and the hours roll along, I just saw Yuval Steinitz, the energy minister, a member of the Likud party, science and technology minister, Ophir Akunis, all coming out and saying that Benjamin Netanyahu is the leader of the Likud party, and that is not going to change. However, when push comes to shove, when it comes down to the Likud party either being in or out of the next government, if that becomes a possibility, well, minds might start changing there as well.
Right. All right, Mike Wagenheim, thank you. I want to go back to the studio very quickly. Shachar Razani, I want to get your thoughts on a potential Likud ousting of Prime Minister Netanyahu. How likely is that?
Well, I think answering Mike's question, the answer to these questions are whether to meet the pre-election promises, the answer is no, whether it comes to Netanyahu or to the issue of ultra-Orthodox in the government. And it was great to listen to Benny Gantz, which is a national unity party, talking a national unity government, because the skeleton of Blue and White is Yair Lapid and Yesh Atid. Without that infrastructure, Blue and White would never have been able to have such an achievement. Having said that, they're about to face their second biggest challenge. How are they going to function in the political sphere with a master like Benjamin Netanyahu and the possible attempts to fracture and split Kahol Levan from within? For underneath the Blue and White lie many shades of gray.
Many shades of gray, indeed. You like that, huh?
I do. Look, we know that Benny Gantz is a guy who likes to keep his options open. He's been that way, I think, throughout his career, certainly that way in politics. But I think if you look underneath these numbers, it's really pretty fascinating. As you've been rightly saying the whole evening, we only have exit polls so far. The truth is these results we have from the actual vote, totally meaningless at this point. But the exit polls actually become more meaningful throughout the night as they're updated with real results. And the latest updates are suggesting that blue and white and Likud are actually tied. Exactly tied, which is exactly the same position they were in several months ago. So the reality is blue and white has been a force, was a force in the April election. It's an equal force this time. Both those major parties saw the number of seats they have decline in that period. And if you look at what's normally considered the right and the right is still bigger than the left.
And it's interesting because blue and white's main policy was not Netanyahu. Their other policies are very similar thing in terms of security, in terms of other things. Their whole stance was to be an alternative to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the party's gaining traction. So whilst you have these ardent supporters of Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel that even refer to him as King Bibi, the Melech Bibi, that's how much love and support there is for Bibi. There seems to be, as well, a certain sector of the population that wanted anyone but Bibi.
Yes, Michelle, but when polling over the last several weeks, when Israelis were asked, who do you want to be prime minister? Overwhelming numbers picked Netanyahu. Very few picked Gantz. In fact, everyone was polling under 10% for the most part. He had over 40%. So that's the paradox of this election.
And that's an excellent point, that whilst parties, the votes for the parties were diverging, the majority of Israelis still somehow want Prime Minister Netanyahu to be the Prime Minister of Israel.
And even if you look on the screen with the 5.26%, it does appear that the center-right is still leading, even with the 5.2%.
And by the way, that's the Likud party headquarters. We're awaiting to hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Doesn't seem to be quite as full as the blue and white party headquarters in Tel Aviv. Judging by these images, doesn't seem to be as jubilant as the blue and white party headquarters. But speaking of jubilant parties, we do want to check in with another one. As we mentioned earlier, the American Zionist movement is hosting several election watch parties tonight. Let's now check in with Andy Rosejan. He is at a party being hosted in Chicago. Andy, what's the mood there like?
Well, Michelle, a little quiet at the moment. People have kind of been drifting in and out of this election watch party here in Chicago. Of course, Chicago, a pretty liberal city, and the Midwest in general, though, much more conservative. So the big question here that I have for Eddie Dolgen, who is one of our hosts here, if you can come on a little bit closer, Eddie, the question is, how will Israelis around Chicago and the Midwest react if Gantz really does win this race?
I believe that the Israeli community before the elections were pretty much divided.
One person.
Maybe 50-50 or close to that. But as an Israeli community that supports Israel, I think we will support whichever government is elected.
Does living here in the Midwest kind of shape at all the view that you have of what's going on in Israel with this election?
We are very connected as the Israeli community in the Chicago area and the Midwest area, and we are always looking for the best results for the Israelis in Israel and the connections and the relationships between the Israelis who live in America and the Israelis in Israel.
We will find out like everyone else. Thank you so much, Eddie. By the way, Eddie's husband flew back to Israel just to cast his vote. That's how much passion there is here in Chicago for a lot of folks. Michelle, back to you.
All right, Andy, thank you so much. Andy Rosejan live for us in Chicago. Again, I want to go back to the official results coming in from the Israeli Electoral Commission, and 5.26% of the votes counted, and they do indicate that Likud has just about 31% of the vote, blue and white 24% of the vote. Again, a very small number of the votes counted, only about 336,000 votes out of a total of 6.39 million voters. So we'll see how that develops. And that, again, is the Likud party headquarters. Not nearly as big a crowd, not nearly as jubilant an atmosphere as what we saw at the blue and white party headquarters. We're waiting to see Prime Minister Netanyahu take the stage. Let's go back to my in-studio guests. Shachar Razani, That doesn't look like the happiest visual, does it?
No, and I have to say it starts to, and I wonder what the results will say tomorrow, the boy who cried wolf. We have grown so accustomed to the Prime Minister crying wolf and going on every possible interview, it became a point of downright ridicule that it might just be that even his supporters refuse to buy it this time and go and vote relying on the vice versa that they're already done.
One of Netanyahu's biggest selling points is that he is the only one able to represent Israel on the world stage. He's met with Putin. He has a good relationship with President Trump, that he is the only one that represents Israel adequately on the world stage. Do you think in the 30 seconds we have left that a Prime Minister Gantz would be able to hold the same clout?
No, and also, look, let me just say, no matter how you feel about Netanyahu, on every measure of metric, he's been an incredibly successful prime minister. And if he were to be turned back from Israelis by now, it would be like on the order of Churchill being turned back by the British. It had that dynamic. I mean, this is a man who has been his custodian of a booming economy, of security, of an international world stage and diplomacy that we had never seen with Israel.
Right.
And no, Gantz has never been in any position like that before.
All right. Again, too soon to call. Thank you so much, Thane Rosenbaum. Our special election of the Israeli special coverage continues after the quick break. Keep it right here. Greenstein